I want to tell you about how pseudo-intellectuals form and how you can identify them. To start off for context, I'm a self-declared pseudo-intellectual, so I'm going to tell it through the lens of how I became a pretentious pseudo-intellectual. I'm sure you all know one, those upper middle class kids that are know-it-alls that think they're smart, but they're not actually really smart. We got to go back to childhood, okay? I was a kid that I was not athletic. I was not good looking. I was not popular. I didn't get any interest from girls. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was somebody that was very insecure and I had no self esteem whatsoever. And on top of that, at this point in my life, I also had very poor grades. And I remember my parents, my dad would say, and this is nothing against my parents, I've had very amazing supportive parents, but he would say, "Oh, he's an idiot. He's never gonna accomplish anything." And he wouldn't say this in front of me, but I would hear, when I would be listening in on my parents, that my dad would say, he just doesn't have any brain at all. And I remember just being so insecure and lacking any sort of self worth altogether, nothing to really justify my existence. That was how I saw it. That I shouldn't even be alive. And I'm like a 9-year-old kid at this point. And so I go into high school, nothing in every other department changes. I'm still, unathletic, unpopular, an autistic loser. Um, but then I found Khan Academy, and because the way high school is structured is good grades don't depend on your intelligence, it depends more on your effort. And if you do the homework sets, the same questions will show up on the tests. So anybody can get a good grade if they just put in the effort to like learn all the homework solutions and memorize them. That's what I did. I memorized all the solutions and I got really high grades and I thought this meant that I was smart. And that was until grade 12 came around where we had a high school teacher that would basically give us math riddles before every class. And he gave a riddle and sorry, he didn't give a riddle. I wasn't very good at the riddles because I wasn't actually smart. And intelligence is your ability to solve problems you haven't seen before, because anybody can solve a problem they've seen before through memorization. Intelligence is, you know, neither of us know how to play checkers. We both learn the rules at the same time, and we're forced into a match, and who's going to come on top is the person that's just generally more intelligent. Whereas, if you have somebody that's smarter than somebody else, but the other person has been playing checkers for 10 years, they can beat them because they have that in practice and they know some of the theory and the tricks. So these math riddles, I hadn't seen them before, so I did very poorly in them. There was another guy in my class who would do very well, and that really bothered me because I had a higher grade than him in the class, but I just couldn't seem to solve the problem before he did. And our teacher, he had a qualitative assessment of your mathematical skills that was a portion of the grade. It was 5% of your grade. And I had the highest grade in the class overall, excluding this qualitative assessment. I had a 95%, and this is grade 12. And in his qualitative assessment, he gave me an 8 out of 10. And being as egotistical as I was, I went to him and I said, I don't know why you give me 8 out of 10 when I have the highest grade in the class. How do I have a 95 and you give me 8 out of 10? And, I'll never forget this. He looks at me and he says, you know, you're not that smart. And that's how he said it. He's like, you're not that smart. I can put something on this board and you can memorize it and you can understand it very quickly. But if I give you something you haven't seen before, you just don't have that ability to solve it. And this really crushed me because I knew it was true. Deep down, I knew that I wasn't that smart, but I chose to ignore him, and I chose to choose one of the most difficult undergrad majors, which was chemical engineering, even though I should have done something that was better suited for me. I chose to ignore him and do something like that because being seen as intelligent had become a part of my identity. It had become my entire self-worth. How I justified my existence was, I'm smart because I get good grades. And the way society works, as somebody who's somewhat autistic, I'm on the spectrum. What I learned through society was that it's okay to be weird. It's okay to be autistic. It's okay to be unpopular. It's okay to be ugly. It's okay to, be a virgin. As long as you're smart, that justifies your existence. You have some value to society. And even if you look at a lot of movies, you look at movies like A Beautiful Mind, where you have, or like Rain Man, where you have these, autistic savants. Well, in the case of Rain Man, it's much more severe. I would say A Beautiful Mind is a better example. It's like when you're gifted, your other aspects of weirdness, they're almost romanticized, where it's like it's not that just that it's okay that you're a bit socially awkward. It's like a nice little quirk of yours. But when you're autistic and you don't have intelligence and you're not gifted, then all that leaves is weird, and you're just a complete social reject who's unworthy of anything and has no social value at all. So I was so terrified of that. I was so terrified of not having any self-worth, anything to base my self-esteem in. I was so terrified of going back to that 9-year-old who thought that he shouldn't even exist, that he's worthless, that I was prepared to do anything to preserve this identity of being intelligent. So when I got into university, when I got into chemical engineering, I tried to employ the same technique of doing the homework, memorizing the solutions, and then taking the exam. The only problem is, for anybody that's taken engineering, the exam problems look nothing like the homework problems. So I became a very poor student. I went from the top of my class in high school, in every single class, math, physics, English, chemistry, to a very mediocre student. And my ego couldn't handle this. So to justify my grades to other people, I just said, I'm lazy, I procrastinate a lot. And the other thing I learned, and this is what pseudo-intellectuals do, and this is one of the techniques you can use to identify them, is we only speak about things where we have domain expertise. We don't speak about anything where we know that you also have knowledge, because then you could challenge us. We always steer the conversation into a domain where we have knowledge. So if you are an electrician and say you actually have a higher fluid intelligence than I do, which is totally possible, and I have seen this before, where a lot of technicians actually are smarter than engineers in terms of raw intelligence, they're just less educated. So when I come across somebody like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to steer the conversation into a domain where you simply just lack knowledge. You're not stupid, you just lack knowledge. I'm going to talk to you about electromagnetism, or how logic gates in computers are arranged to do certain things like binary addition. And you're going to think, oh my god, how do you know this? You must be so smart. But really, I'm not smart. I'm just parroting things that I learned earlier, which you could also equally learn and probably be able to apply better than I can into actually solving real-world problems. So that's how I was able to maintain that identity to my peers, to my family, so that I could keep convincing them that I was smart, because I felt that was the only way that anybody would ever want to associate with me. That was the only way that anybody would ever see any value in me. That was the only way anybody would ever care about me. And if I didn't maintain that identity, that I was worthless and everybody would abandon me. That's how I thought. And that's how pseudo-intellectuals think. So they, instead of using intellectualism to solve problems in the world, it becomes a survival strategy for the ego to justify its own existence. It becomes a performance. When I graduated, the problem was when you enter the workforce, you can't BS employers. You can BS your family, you can BS your uncle at the family dinner, but you can't BS an engineer that's sitting in front of you interviewing you. So when I graduated, I had a poor GPA, I had no work experience, and now I had to confront the reality that I don't think I have the competency to actually be a chemical engineer. And so I basically had to come to terms with slowly the fact that everybody was going to realize when I didn't get that job offer that I was a fraud. And that was a very difficult transition for me. But what I came to realize was that nobody actually cared. Nobody cared. Nobody even asked really what I did for work. You know, I work as a technician level role right now, and nobody really even cares what I do or asks. So I realized that a lot of this was in my own head, but the lesson here for you is that if you're on this path, don't be like me. Don't major in something where you're going to be at the bottom of your class. Only go into a domain where you can be in the upper quartile. That's the lesson. I'm telling you, if you are a top 10% electrician, so that's not exactly the upper quartile, the top 10%, on the 25% anyways. If you're a top 10% electrician, you'll go much further in life, you'll go much further in your earning potential than if you were a bottom 10% chemical engineer. A top 10% electrician can work for somebody and eventually open up their own business, become a contractor, and because they're smarter than the majority of electricians, they're able to build a more efficient business, and they're able to outcompete everyone for bids, and they're able to build better projects and get better reviews. A bottom 10% chemical engineer or electrical engineer, you're going to be stressed out of your mind if you ever do end up getting into that position. And despite working more, you're going to be behind your peers because your brain is not wired that way. And if you actually look at studies, it's very difficult to change your fluid intelligence. You can gain more knowledge, but that raw IQ, that ability to solve a problem you've never seen before, that doesn't really change once you're an adult and you lose your neuroplasticity. So basically what I want to tell you is that if you want to look good to people at the sacrifice of your future, keep being a pseudo-intellectual. But if you actually want to succeed in life, you need to be honest with yourself about what you're capable of. Enter that domain where you are towards the top, because even a dumb electrical engineer can go into many fields and be at the top. Because even a dumb electrical engineer is still smarter than your average person. So if you're listening and you found yourself in this situation, find a domain where you're at the top, learn it in and out, excel at it, rise to the top, and you will be successful. And let go of that identity and find another source of self-worth, because it's not worth sacrificing your future over to keep up this act. And that's what a lot of people are doing. If you look at a lot of the unemployment in the market right now, people say, oh my God, there's an unemployment crisis, there's no jobs. That's not true. Look at the data. 60% of manufacturers say that they can't fill roles. They have open job positions, and they can't find anybody to do the job. Why is that? It's because they say that they can't find anyone that's qualified. The reason is we have a bunch of people that got pressured into going into STEM degrees that don't belong in STEM degrees. Their brain is not wired that way. They used Khan Academy to basically cheat their way through school, because instead of discovering a problem for themselves, they had somebody explain the homework problem solution to them, and they memorized it and they applied it on a test. That's not intelligence. That's not what engineering is. We have an entire generation of people, of kids, trying to be something they're not. 20 years ago, if you had an IQ of 95, you became a millwright. Now, you can go into university and try to become a mechanical engineer, and then you're going to complain that you can't find a job, and that is the job market. It's not the job market. It's that you're trying to be something that you are just inherently not. And it's a very difficult truth. It's a very difficult pill to swallow. And that's why you see all this YouTube content that says job crisis, job market, job market. The only reason that content, you see it everywhere, is because it gets the most engagement, and the reason it gets the most engagement is that it's the most emotionally satisfying to your ego. Because instead of having to admit that you're just applying to jobs in a field that you're not qualified for, you watch content that basically confirms your belief that, oh no, it's not that, it's just that the job market's really bad. 60% of manufacturers say that they have job openings, they just can't find anyone. There's jobs out there. You just need to switch the field in which you're applying to jobs. And I can guarantee you, when you do that and when you find that field, you will get employed, you'll find a job, you're going to ace your interview, because even a dumb engineer is going to give an amazing interview for, say, a technician position, and you will rise to the top. So the lesson here is, the more you align yourself with what you were naturally intended to do, the happier you will be, and the earlier you do it, the less time you will waste. Don't be one of these people that work as a barista at Starbucks, or as a bartender, or as a waiter, instead of accepting that they're probably intended to be a technician, or a dental hygienist, or whatever, one of these, intermediate roles between high level white collar jobs and blue collar. Stop. Do what you're intended to do, so you can actually be successful and make money. And the reason you see all these people, why do you see computer science grads that will work as a bartender instead of working as a technician? Instead of, maybe working as a controls technician. Why? When they can get both jobs. Well, the reason they want to work as a bartender is because they have the plausible deniability of saying, of course I'm not a bartender, man. I'm a computer science graduate. I'm just waiting to get a job. But if they start working as a controls technician, then that plausible deniability is no longer there. And people are going to infer that, no, this is probably what this guy is going to be doing as a career. So they're like, well, I'm either going to work minimum wage, where I had a plausible deniability of saying, oh my God, of course I'm not going to do this forever. Isn't that so obvious? Obviously I'm not going to be a bartender forever. Then just choosing a career that better suits them, where they can actually succeed and rise to the top. Don't be one of those people. I tried to do that. I decided life is too short to pretend to be something I'm not. Who cares what my family thinks? Who cares what my peers thinks? I'm gonna actualize into what I can actually be, and be the best at that. And so I changed my field, and I'm doing something else right now. And you can too. And don't let, your perceived image of what other people think you are, and trying to live up to it, hold you back from actual success in life. Instead of trying to preserve an image, actually go out there and succeed. I'm telling you, I guarantee you, most people don't care. Most people don't think about you as much as you think they do. And a lot of it's in your head. Anyways, that got a bit emotional towards the end. Anyways, guys, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna keep you updated on my journey. Please leave a comment on if you've experienced anything similar to this, or if you've seen anyone that's gone through something like this. And thanks for watching as always.